11:30 a.m. and we're here to discuss blights. And who wants to start?
I certainly can. One of the things that our office was tasked with was the blight complaint form so that it's specific to blights. We do have one, and obviously our office is of the mindset that if you have something that's workable, then let's work from there instead of trying to recreate the wheel. So I do have that for everyone.
Thank you.
All a copy. And so and this is on the county's website. And then I talked with Dan about it a little bit as well. And we discussed bringing this to the board to discuss if there's any changes that we'd like to make, anything we want to add or remove. One of the things that Dan suggested is potentially adding the specific code sections, like maybe to the backside, so that people can read what the code says. I guess it's mostly an including language advising them what will happen after they submit this, right? So, like we discuss with most complaints or with criminal charges that come in, almost always someone that is reporting a crime, unless they are a victim to, say, like a battery or an assault or like a violent offense, they're not usually kept apprised of what happens after they've submitted information, unless they are needed to testify. We keep that same sentiment with blights and things like that, that if it's still being investigated, if they've submitted the information that they have, and we don't need anything else from the complainant, we typically don't keep them involved in the investigation unless they're needed. Sometimes they are needed to provide further testimony, evidence if necessary. Then we can certainly address that. But I think that the language included on a complaint that notifies a complainant that they likely won't be contacted any further once they've submitted the information unless it's necessary might also be helpful. Dan had suggested that A through H maybe be adjusted on the complaint form that comes through with that is specific to P&Z. The check boxes are specific to like letting someone essentially say like, here's what the violation is, and whereas that's usually our job, right, is to do the investigation and then decide if there's a violation and if it is, where it fits in the code. I think for this one, it's not as prevalent because it's more descriptive, but if there's any changes that we want to make for A through H, what I would require or ask that we do is if we are going to keep A through H, and I think that they're useful to give people a sense of what kind of things are and are not a nuisance or blight, is that then the narrative part be a requirement, so that they can't just like check the box and then submit it, right? That they provide either anecdotal or photographic evidence for those to be considered, because I think that will maybe cut down on some like wild goose chases where people are maybe just checking a box, signing the form, and sending it in. And then also it doesn't look like this form specifically has the complainant sign under penalty of perjury, which I think would be helpful. I'm happy to take up any other suggestions and amend this complaint form in any way that you guys would find most useful, or for whoever we're tasking with investigations to be most useful.
Okay.
We discussed at our workshop meeting this dichotomy between how we go about the investigation. And I think it stems significantly from what you guys would like to see as far as how these issues are resolved. So we always talk about blights or nuisances in two different scenarios, either through a criminal action or a civil action. They each have their own pros and cons. The criminal action carries with it jail time, which isn't seen as a great alternative. Obviously, putting someone in jail, they're not abating any issues on their property, but it can be a faster and cheaper way to deal with blights because it's to go through the system is very fast. There's a complaint that's drafted, it's filed with the court, they're seen within a month or so, and then we talk with them about what the issues are, and we can formulate potentially a sentence or a probationary term or a prosecutor's probation that requires them to abate the specific issues that are on their property. However, on the con side is the criminal action, right? So like our only other remedy for that is to put them in jail, which then doesn't abate their property issues. Sometimes they just don't care about whether or not they're going to see jail time. And so then we kind of run into a stalemate there too, that they don't really care if they're charged with a crime. They'll continue to do what they want on their own property. On the other side of that is the civil action. That one gets us to the end that we want, so cleaning up the property, abating any of those nuisance issues. It's a lot longer of a process because you have to demonstrate through the court that there's this concern that the county has, it's in the county's interest. Then have the court require them to abate the issue in a reasonable amount of time, and if they don't, then we can enter into the property. That is usually a very long process, and closer to like months to at least a year. But it gets us to that end, but it also costs the county a lot of money. Criminal investigations, because they are shorter, cost generally less money. The civil actions cost a lot of money to go in and clean up the property that we may or may not see as a return, because once the county does take that action, incurs those costs, it is assessed to that property and we can eventually put it on their tax rolls, but whether or not the county sees that return on that cost that's been expended is either a very long time when they potentially sell the property if it's on the tax roll, or over a very long period of time if they do try to pay it back, if ever. Where that puts us is who completes the investigation. Because if we're on the civil side, we have somewhat less concerns about Fourth Amendment violations. So then our county P&Z, who is not trained in criminal rules, Fourth Amendment violations, things like that, can investigate those crimes or those actions to file a civil action. On the other hand, on the other hand, if we were saying we would rather pursue criminal action, seeing if we can get that to work for the majority of these properties, then our office has concerns about how that investigation plays out. Because if we have, say, James go and do the investigation, he's not super familiar with Fourth Amendment rights, he violates one of those rights, then we lose the entire case. Because it's a Fourth Amendment violation that leads to a motion to suppress. The sheriff's office and those officers have that kind of training. And so if we're heading in the criminal route, I would prefer that a trained officer conduct those investigations. But then we run into the problem as to whether or not the sheriff's office has the resources in order to do that. So we can start off with the complaint form because that may be an easier task to tackle. But the overall theme about how we abate these issues and what you guys decide would be the best action for the county and its constituents is maybe a longer discussion about where we put our resources.
Maybe that's a longer discussion, but it seems like it's kind of core to where everything else goes. I mean, is it Is it a possibility, when we do the civil route, assuming we win and they're ordered to clean up and they don't, then the county's still responsible to go in at our own cost and clean up, which is prohibitive to getting anything cleaned up in most cases.
Right. And I mean, on the criminal side, I mean, I just had 2 blight cases on my criminal docket today, and both of them came to me and said, I have physical disabilities. I can't do anything about this. And so then where does the city go from there? I mean, it was a city case at that point in time, but I mean, there's usually a number of reasons, or I guess I'll call them excuses, as to how someone's property gets this way. And it's generally multifaceted, with some people that just don't care. Mental health concerns, substance abuse concerns, physical disabilities. And so even if, say, we get all the way to the end with the civil route, the county goes in, cleans up the property, and say they pay for it or they don't, it a lot of times ends up back in the same place.
Mm-hmm.
So we're also kind of fighting that battle. Like, it's potentially a resolvable issue over, like I said, probably about a year's time, because I think usually the court will at least give them through, not the winter months to try to abate the problem. And so we're probably looking at, regardless of when we file, at least a summer month period where the court will give them the time to clean it up before then we go in. And then is it, turning into fall or the winter at that point in time where we're saying they still didn't get it done in a reasonable amount of time? And then do we then have to wait for another season where we're able to go in and do it? So if after a year, maybe 2 of time, and we incur the costs, does it then eventually get back to the same position that we started? Obviously, those are all hypothetical situations, but in the few that we've seen completed through the civil action, they've ended up in the same spot relatively soon thereafter.
So that's a fact historically, right? The ones that we have done civilly have often ended up eventually back to the way they started.
One in particular that I know that I completed for the city of Smelterville, they did go in, cleaned up the property. The gentleman was able to pay the costs, and so he did. But yeah, about a few months after that, essentially then he just started taking all of the stuff that was likely on the inside to the outside. And because, we don't deal with the inside, only deal with the outside, but likely the inside of someone's house that looks like that on the outside looks relatively the same. Or they just accumulate more stuff. I mean, it's, again, potentially a mental health concern, or any other series of combination of issues that got them to that place that don't just go away because we took their stuff away.
And also, does IDEQ or Panhandle Health ever play a role in some of these blights? Because some of them, I think,
certainly.
Yeah, I think they would also.
Yeah.
So they're one of the stakeholders of agencies that we go to with all of our building permits, land use permits, and those kinds of things. So when we get these complaints, yes, we assess them for what it is that's being complained about, and then if it's a health risk, if it's a health risk or some sort of a something the DEQ or PhD would be involved in, we certainly ask them to investigate, and they do their own investigation to determine is there some sort of life-threatening situation or some sort of environmental concern to deal with, and then what would be that mitigation. We would certainly just add that on the list of things to fix. So if they're inappropriately disposing of waste or hazardous materials, then certainly we would address that with that complaint.
And as we discussed at the last workshop, they Panhandle Hall, right? The 2 gentlemen that were here.
Yes.
They did show up. The struggle with them is that they have a lot of resources to try to abate these kinds of issues that do fall under their jurisdiction. but they don't have any enforcement abilities. So they did ask that our office become involved if there was something that could be criminal or that we could help send out letters, and we're absolutely happy to do that. We generally have a form letter and we can plug and play, you know, they're kind of things to, and sometimes getting a letter from the prosecutor's office does kick some people into gear, sometimes. And so we're happy to help them with that. But with DEQ and mental health, then it's still going to come back and fall on the county if there isn't any enforcement that is working on their end.
Right.
Because they do have someone that's specific to issues that aren't in compliance to go and address those, right? So.
So what can we do now to move forward?
It's always a really good question.
Well, it depends on your definition of forward.
On some of these blights.
We've continued to move towards a process and towards an ability to come to some mitigation or resolution. As she explained, particularly those blight ones, because of the subjective nature, it's extremely difficult to come to what is clean, what is not clean. The logistics of the due process to get there has been what we've been working on this summer and trying to get the group together to put together a scenario of who's doing what to who, when, and how we do it so that we don't get ourselves in more legal trouble. So we've been working on that. We've been working on an assessment way of tracking the complaints, being able to track where they've been and where they're going. That's a hard one to put together. So we're working. There's not software out there that we're aware of to be able to track that. We've taken in complaints, we've investigated them, and we've put them on a hierarchy of what's important. And if they're not a life safety issue, if they're not an infringement upon other private property owners, they fall back on the list of things that are important to take care of. And we're all under-resourced, we're all understaffed, we're all trying to do all of our jobs at once. That's where it falls on the hierarchy of getting things done. And like I said, it's hard to go put a bunch of time and effort into telling somebody to clean up their yard when you can't tell them what does that mean. And without some court order, without some court decision, without some process to go through to where it gets defined, it becomes a very arduous process for anybody to do, whether it's the sheriff's department, whether it's planning and zoning, or whether it's prosecuting office, or whether it's PhD.
Do we need to change anything in our code or anything like that?
We have two different.
Yes, there's a few different codes, and we could start there, but once we also run into this problem that if you get so specific, then anything outside of that isn't a violation, right? And so then you get these loopholes when you keep it specific enough that people should know what the issue is, but not so specific that they can fit into these little loopholes that aren't defined in the code, is where we try to keep our codes. And I think that's where we currently are. I mean, unless Dan has a different idea, but I think that one of our things that we wanted to establish with the board is, I think, and Dan kind of alluded to this a little bit, creating maybe a list of problem properties. And one who compiles that list and keeps it, but then also deciding where then we're putting our resources. Are we saying we have a list of 10 properties and 1 being the worst, 10 being the least worst? Do we hit the low-hanging fruit, get 10, 9, and 8? Do we hit number 1 really hard and maybe move on to the others once we've dealt with number 1? And for each of those, does it look like a different process for each of them with regard to civil and criminal? Because then that's going to determine which agency that goes to fulfill those needs.
So because we're understaffed, we don't want 2 departments chasing similar balls. It's a doubling of resources that we certainly don't have.
Whether it's civil or criminal? I mean, what are we going to try to nail down some guidelines that say, okay, if this property has this, then it's criminal, or if this property has this, it's civil. I mean,
In our code, it allows us to do both processes for every property. So it's really a resource decision, and mainly by the board. What kind of resources do you want to put into it one way or the other? Do we want to send it to the sheriff's office to investigate criminally and try that route first? And then I think probably Lance and the sheriff's office probably have some concerns about where that falls in their hierarchy. And then if that doesn't work, then do we come back to the board and say, hey, that process didn't work. Do we want to go the civil route? Do we want to begin that process at the start saying, well, we'll do one or the other? That's really a resource discussion. And the civil route is always going to be a request from the board because it's a county expense that isn't worked into the budget, that would have to be allocated and cleared through you guys to do the civil complaint and those sort of things. It comes through our office, so that's not the issue. But if we want to pursue it all the way to the end, it's likely a property that they're not going to clean up by themselves. And so it will almost always end with the county stepping in and paying the cost of cleanup. And so that decision would always come from you guys. And so the same rhetoric then surrounds with each property. Do we take them on a case-by-case basis? Or if the board wants to try to utilize the resources where we charge all of them criminally first, that is also a decision we can make. Or do we deal with them case by case? And then we'd have to obviously create a list, have at least some information for each case, and then come to you guys with those ones and say, here's what we have. Which route do you want us to go? And that's why it always kind of becomes a difficult issue, because the complaints can come in from so many different directions, through Panhandle Health, through a code violation, through a criminal action. They all come in at various points, and so each agency is maybe chasing it in a different route. And to get it investigated and resolved also can take so many routes, which is why blights are so difficult to deal with, on top of the other issues about, people's property rights.
Would it help to examine the code on this in a workshop format and make sure we all have the same understanding, and or
The
look at if
codes,
there's areas that need to be,
'Cause
that
there's
could
three.
be improved?
There's like three.
Yeah, so we have
different-
the nuisance one, that's the
Yeah.
general one. We have one that we use in a blight format with the wrecking yards.
Yeah, right, yard.
And then one that's specific, I think, to like cars.
Yeah.
So I think there might be some opportunity to explore all that, and if there's a way to tighten up a definition, because many times, like she said, depending on how loose the definition is, does it pass the laugh test or the seriousness test of is it within it, or is it so specific that, oh, well, I'm not that, and I'm not this, and I'm not doing this, so then you're not guilty of it because you're not meeting the specificness of it. So we could certainly look at that and see if there's any way to tighten it up where it can be tightened, or maybe loosen it where it can be loosened so that more fits in and you have a better ability to say, because with our nuisance ordinance, it does have a definition of it's this and garbage and this, and it's like, okay, so if you look at a property, yes, it has all those things. But my yard has all those things in one shape or form, but my yard's not blighted. So the subjectiveness of what somebody considers blight and what isn't gets really tricky, because then how do you fit that specifically into that code? But we could certainly look to do that, and there are some things like the wrecking yards. My experience comes from building and land use things, and those kinds of things are way less subjective. You're either building a building without a permit or you're not. So it's pretty easy to just tell them, get a permit and we'll get you mitigated and we'll go forward. There's not a lot of court process. There's not a lot of deciding whether or not you need a permit or not. Sometimes it's a bunch of arguments and a bunch of follow-up and a bunch of stuff on our part, but essentially you're guilty or you're guilty. Same thing with land use. You're either running a business or you're doing some sort of land use without the right permitting process, or you're not. This is kind of one of those things. You could have stuff in your yard, but is it blight or is it not blight? Cars are one of those other things. You either have a car that's registered or you don't have a car that's registered, and it's either hidden behind a fence or behind a building or in a building, or it's not. So cars might be one of those elements of we could go clean up some properties with cars because we have a more definitive code citation to be able to say, you've got 10 cars, they're not registered, you got X number of days to get rid of them.
So
And then we go through that process.
I haven't
And
looked
so
at it. I should have. But
You
does
break
ours
it apart from the blight part, but
does ours also require them to be inoperable?
No.
there's some
Okay.
discussion about them being.
I just dealt with one
Parts or
today that like
pieces
some of our
and-
cities still have the inoperable in there, and that's really difficult for someone to do from an outside perspective.
Right.
I mean, some of them are kind of obvious. If there's no engine in it, then that's
There's
easy.
no
But
tires on it. Yeah.
I think it would be a good idea, though, to go back through and do a workshop on those ordinances. I don't think that would hurt anything, and then that way we have a good move forward.
Sure.
But,
And
Because like you just pointed out, the one ordinance is more specific, so it's easier to enforce. So
Correct.
maybe there are some things we could do to the others.
And we discussed that at some length in that workshop we had in August about trying to pick apart the low-hanging fruit or the easy ones that you could get compliance on, and still going after those parts. And if you can get rid of the cars, maybe they clean up some of the trash at the same time, that kind of thing. And that might be a way to go after it. And that's where we centered back on, we can't do 20 investigations. It's just not going to happen. But we might be able to do 3. We might be able to do 5, and then as a group try to decide which is the easiest one to get more fruit, or get more advancement from.
right, I mean, is it like we
'Cause sometimes-
start from the top and we address that one, and so all the rest of people want to fall in line for, we come in and take stuff from their property, or if we deal with the 3 easiest ones, then at least like we're making progress. I don't know. I mean,
Trying to assess a hierarchy to who
Yeah.
complained first and who's been around longer, and those kinds of things. That there's still some of that element of trying to decide which one's more pressing than the next one, and go that route. So with that group, we had it started the formulation of, I don't know what you want to call it, a committee, a task force, or a code enforcement team, which was the stakeholders of agencies and departments that maybe we meet somewhat regularly to assess cases. And initially it was like, well, we still need a process and a tracking system and a way to go about it, and so that needs to get developed first before we can have monthly meetings to talk about how well we're doing with it. So that's still in the works and in the progress.
Okay.
And Lance, I don't know if you have any insight. I mean, obviously with the vote from last night, I think that their resources and utilization to investigate criminal blights is, in light of the fact that we've had, 6 new child sex cases that just came in that are major cases, they just end up falling to the least important.
Important out of the stuff we're doing. I think it would just have to be looked at by whoever the sheriff is coming up here in a few weeks, that if the resources are there to invest in that, if that's a priority for them. I do think we need to figure out a way to prioritize it. I hate driving around these gulches and seeing the mess up in them, and we're not making any headway on it for sure. So I think it would be important to figure out how to free up one of our guys, or at least even if it's a day a week or something, get a guy who can work them. But that's going to be up to the new sheriff.
Sure.
And of course, back in May, you'd made the decision to center the tracking and the complaint with planning and zoning, and we've been doing that. So I think that stays the same. I think the complaints still come to our office, and then I manage that to the extent of trying to manage the group, and then we just keep moving forward. And we had talked about in that that we probably will end up trying to narrow the cases to the couple of the ones we think we can make the most progress on, decide whether it's going to be a criminal or civil action. Some of that depends on who the person is. you know, and as we all know, everybody knows everybody, but sometimes you can get further with somebody, but treating them, you know, a different way. And so sometimes
Case by case.
civil might be a better way to go, or criminal might be a better way to go. A question I had is once a decision's been made or a court decision's been made about, you know, go clean up your yard, is it a new crime when they put stuff in there next year, or is it a continuation of the same crime and they're still?
Double jeopardy. No, our code is specific to every day that the violation persists or exists is a new violation.
Okay, but meaning that if we go to court, we say you clean up your property, and they clean up the property, or we clean up their property, in a year's time they've got more stuff there. Is it a rehash of the old?
Oh, yes, we'd have to restart the whole process.
Claim, or is it a whole new
new case?
New case process?
Yeah, we wouldn't be able to like piggyback off of a prior civil action. We essentially get one bite at the apple once we've asked the court and they've okayed us to go into the property. We get to go in, do the cleanup that we think is needed, and then we're out of there and we don't get to go back in. It's kind of like a search warrant. So
Okay.
you get one chance.
Never confirmed that.
Now, on DEQ, when do they get involved?
Thus far, the complaints that I've taken, if there's some accusation or alleged environmental spill, hazardous materials, improper waste management of solid waste, you know, we go to PhD or DEQ. We've done that with wrecking yards and stuff like that, where you've got oils and hazardous materials being spilled.
When does it become a hazard? When there's
it really depends.
Rodent infestation and things like that.
It really comes down to that's somewhat subjective, and and then that's up to DEQ to then come in and be able to investigate and determine that how much oil is on the ground or how much situation is going on where there is a rodent infestation. And my experience has been just because there's rodents doesn't mean there's a health issue.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously at some point, there's diseases and there are things, and they have processes for testing and processes for capturing animals and testing them, and certainly there's other evidence. So we've never seen a case that's gone that far to where I've seen any kind of help. But that's when we would bring them in, as to, hey, is there something going on here in this pile of mess that's back here? That's and we've seen those with somebody that's piling up their garbage. There's food and waste and stuff that's spoiling and creating problems. That can become some sort of a infestation problem, and they could help address that. Same thing with septic systems and waste management. If they're inappropriate disposing of waste, then they can address that and come up with a fix for. And they have some rules on their, in the IDAPA rules that govern that you can't dispose of your waste, not in accordance with their rules. So they can be found in violation of improper disposal.
Okay. Have we reached out to them at all and maybe have them come in to see if
100%. We work with them every day, and so with that task force meeting we had in August, both Jason Pepin and Ted were here, and we work with them continuously on building permits and other land use stuff, but also in this code enforcement thing. So they're certainly supportive, and the more we can bring them in on a case and have them investigate, and they've come over and investigated things that were recent complaints that were alleging disposal problems, and they went and investigated and determined.
Panhandle Health, right?
Yes.
Okay.
DEQ is a little bit different because they're a little higher up the chain as far as water quality. Waste management is PhDs until it gets over a certain number of people, so they don't really get involved. Hazardous materials becomes a thing, so when we find some evidence of or if we think there's some evidence, we can certainly bring them in to do their own investigation to determine is there an environmental problem.
Yeah, but with DEQ, they're kind of on their own because they're a federal agency, and we can't investigate or prosecute federal cases. Federal issues, unless it's applicable to a state
EPA,
code, but
yeah,
that's
most of theirs are federal issues.
EPA state.
Yeah. DEQ's Idaho Department of Environmental Quality.
Yeah.
So that so that waste, that disposal or that thing becomes a state problem. It's not a county violation.
Because I know they've cleaned up a property.
Sure.
DEQ's cleaned up a
100%.
property. So that's what I was wondering, is how how did it get to that? You know, what made them want to clean that up?
They
So-
got called in on it to investigate, and
And I-
they went investigated and determined their own violation.
And I think that there was some, like, if the property owner wants help, I think DEQ has like the resources to assist them if they're saying,
Okay.
hey, this is a problem, and they're saying, well, I don't have the resources to fix it, but I would let you do it. That is likely where they found some compliance. We may also find that in people here, but from my experience, we don't. Most
Okay.
people here are, you can't tell me what to do on my property. This is my stuff. You can't touch it. Or I don't have the ability to do anything about it, but I don't want government on my property doing anything with it.
And that's what the problem is county. You usually don't have a lot of, county blights are the hard one. City, city's pretty easy because they, well, the ci- I mean, but
think
if you want to live in the city, if you don't want to live, the counties are usually the rural areas and the
The outskirts.
the outskirts of town, and then the city's more of the cleaner area.
We still see them really frequently in the cities. The cities that we've dealt with mostly use the civil or the criminal route. We have so the person that we went through the process, cleaned up the property, the guy paid, but was back in the same condition a couple months later, was within a city. And they were willing to go through that process because of the state of the property. So, we see it very frequently in the cities. What we see more often in the cities, though, is that people live in such close quarters that they're known more. That, maybe if you're not driving up the gulches as often, or, whatever the case may be, you're not seeing them as often in the county, so they're less reported, they're less followed through on, they're not affecting as many people as they do in cities. And so in cities, we usually have those city agencies either allocate resources like the city of Kellogg did to a code enforcement officer specifically who went around and worked on blights mostly, or are more willing to engage in the long civil process to get it cleaned up. But we do see them a lot in the cities. Like I said, the two that I had this morning that I met with, both out of the city of Osborne, that were criminal charges that were brought.
Hopefully it was one was just down from my street. I don't know. About a half block down.
We've all got
horrible.
neighbors.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think almost everyone can at least name one, and whether or not that one is, blight by our own terms or blight by the community standard. And on the criminal side, not to put more thoughts and considerations, is I have to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt. And if I get one person on that jury that says that's what my property looks like, and that seems reasonable to me, I don't get a conviction, right? So I have to get 6 people to all agree that this stuff in the property is a crime, if they're not willing to take responsibility or deal with it or whatever the case may be. And then the other issue with criminal matters is I can only put someone on probation for 2 years. Is that enough time for them to clean up the property? We found with a certain person in the city of Smelterville, it's not. So those are also some other hindrances and considerations that we work through every time that these issues are brought up too. So I think we all want to deal with them, but because of the subjectiveness and how we deal with them, and if they go back to the way that they were, or the underlying issues that got that person to that point, they are just so difficult to deal with in a general sense.
Mr. Chairman, I still think it'd be a good idea to schedule a workshop and walk through the ordinances to make sure we all understand them and or look for opportunities to strengthen them.
Okay.
I would agree.
What do we have for our next available calendar? A couple weeks from now?
Or I could reach out after if we want.
Okay,
And really-
reach out after, okay.
Send folks in the room.
And then some other things I guess we need to think about is case by case. Are we gonna do something like that? You're currently tracking the complaints, but is it gonna be 1 being worse, 10 being the least? So those are other things to start
Part of the
thinking
workshop
about.
can keep solidifying the process that we need to go through,
Mhm.
and making sure we're adhering to due process in that whatever we're doing, so that we have a way of tracking it and a way of assessing. And that's where something that we had contemplated, I don't know about monthly. Certainly you want to do it as often as you can, or maybe it's monthly. We come in and go, okay, these are the cases I've received. Here's the initial investigation we've done on them. Here's what we know beyond the alleged complaint.
Yeah.
And then as a group, we can then go, okay, well, that's not as bad. This one's really bad. Let's go put some effort into that one. And then continually make those decisions with the hope that within a year, you've made some serious progress on at least some of them.
Right.
So how do we want to do that? Do we want to, because I don't think we can do it as a board, can we?
No,
With the
and
cases
I
bring
certainly
about
would
them?
suggest that because of the cumbersomeness of that,
Yeah.
the committee, the task force, the people, tasked with the job should be able to have the authority to make those decisions. If there's something that's going to incur costs or something like she was alluding to, when we get to some point of, are we going to go criminal or civil on this, maybe there's a board decision to be made, and so that maybe we bring those cases in front of you at a specific meeting to say, hey, we have these cases that need to go forward. Do you want to approve the funds to go forward? We can certainly do everything we can up front. We can do everything we can with letters and threats, and we get some compliance that way. It's the top 20% that you don't get the compliance on that we're going to be talking about, though. So that could be part of that process, is getting to that point.
Yeah.
We can do a bunch on our own.
Mhm.
By my tongue when I'm saying that, because we're all resource lacking, but we can do what we can, and then bring those to you, and that's when that board would be about. It wouldn't be wrong to have one of you in that group, so you're aware of what's happening, and can have some authority to help guide us, and then if there is a decision to be made on procedurally or code-wise or anything, how we want to go, that's what can be brought back to you.
Yeah.
For unified decision.
Okay.
I think that we talked about maybe like finalizing this list or spreadsheet so that we have all of them, and then once we come together, then we can.
Yeah, and that's a tricky one, because there's a whole bunch of data from previous efforts, and it's all over the place. So trying to assemble it and be able to put it in a spreadsheet and trying to determine this is a complaint from 6 years ago. It's still valid. It's still a problem. This is a complaint from last week. It's still valid and still a problem. Now, which one's worse of a problem?
Right.
So getting all that assembled is doable, and then figuring out where do we start.
So
Do you have a idea when you're thinking the list itself will be complete?
It's finding the time to work on it. Of course, now we're out of our summer was a exceptionally busy time for us, so not a lot of time was spent on it. So within a couple of months, we can find the time to assemble all the data. We've got lots of files down there of complaints that were taken in, and going through those and putting them into a spreadsheet.
Because I think
Some of
that,
them are, some of them aren't. And
I
bunch
think
of
what
time
would be
consuming.
helpful is if we have a compiled list so that we can look at what our main issues are, or a common denominator in these problem things in combination with our code to see if there's something that we need to connect there.
Some of those would be more enforceable if our code said this.
Yeah, I mean, almost always it's vehicles, junk vehicles, weeds, like
Garbage,
general
debris.
But Could be something else. Maybe I'm wrong.
Leftover exercise bikes, all that stuff.
That's
So
probably
do-
in your yard.
Okay, so really we just want to work on that list first.
and then
Right,
maybe
I
next
mean,
week
you
we
We
want
can
could
him to
incorporate
get
that
that.
into the workshop.
okay,
Yeah.
incorporate and then talk about who we want to put on the kind of a blight task force or whatever you want to call
Yeah. Little committee.
it, the committee.
Mhm.
I think I
And I
know
think
who
that
our
would-
office will choose.
Yeah.
Always me.
And
I
we
think
essentially,
if we did that, if one of us,
we can add and subtract anybody. We've essentially already done that with the
Mhm.
key department heads or people
Yeah.
and agencies as well.
Mhm.
Okay. And then have them meet
Yeah.
regularly and.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like maybe we should try for every couple months instead of, trying. I know you've had a horrible summer, but at least over the winter, let's
100%. No, I think we
try and
can.
get to every couple months where there's
Mhm.
I
some
think we
visible
go-
steps happening.
Yeah, especially because if we can then start a game plan by the time spring hits, when these issues can be abated, because as soon as the snow flies, it's real tough to
Right.
get that stuff off the
Okay.
property when it's frozen and buried in snow.
So yeah, if we want to look to meet in 2 or 3 weeks, a month, in the beginning of December or something. How soon do you want to meet for the workshop?
A
Couple weeks.
couple weeks.
And certainly, I don't know if it'll be done, but we can certainly have a
Yeah.
list of
Yeah.
something to look
Yeah.
at, and have a better idea of what needs to continue to be put in there. And
All right.
So Sydney, I'll go with you because jury trials next week and the week after, and then I think Thanksgiving, which is generally free, and then I'm out for training the week after. So.
Okay.
Figure out a time.
All right. Anything further? Nothing further here?
I don't think so.
Some good public comment.
I have a question, a couple actually. Do you know how many open blight complaints that are unresolved are currently open? Just an approximation.
I don't know that answer.
I mean, is it like 10 or is it 100?
10 to 15,
10 to 15?
might be a few other ones out there.
Only
Of course, there's probably
There's probably more.
there's
that-
probably 30 more that nobody's complained about.
Yeah.
So you drive around, you see a lot. That doesn't mean there's been a complaint filed.
when you were talking about the criminal aspect of it,
Mhm.
so if you do charge somebody, and let's say you charge them, they get a day in jail, $100 fine, and if they don't resolve the issue, are they charged again and with a more severe punishment? Or is it, how does
No.
that work?
So in county ordinances, you can only charge people with misdemeanors as the highest charge. County and city codes can't be felonies. If they are charged with a crime, it's always a standard misdemeanor. So 180 days in jail and $1,000 fine is the maximum. The day in jail or fine is contingent on them either pleading guilty or being found guilty. So we can't impose a fine or jail time or probation unless they're found guilty or plead guilty. So we have to get to that step first. Typically what happens in a case where, say we have a blight like we did today, the gentleman did plead guilty to the blight itself, and he was put on probation for a period of time. And one of his probation conditions is that he abate the blight issue that he had in his yard. There is jail time that's suspended, that if they don't comply with that term, then we can utilize that suspended jail time as a sanction. So that's typically how a criminal case goes through the process. If they are charged again, it doesn't increase the penalties, aside from a new crime that also carries with it 180 days of jail and $1,000 fine.
Right, potentially. So a judge could actually take that previous conviction into account when he's issuing the punishment for like the second charge. So let's say they did get a $100 fine or probation and suspended jail time. The second time they could get
Yeah, so
up to that certain amount.
sure. So a judge can take a look at their past criminal history and see that this has been a problem multiple times if they, again, accept responsibility. and plead guilty or are found guilty, and they could sentence them to harsher penalties the next time around, but it doesn't increase the maximum.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just wanting to think too, jail time incurs a cost to the county as well. Each inmate costs us about $100 per day that they're in jail.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
So there's a cost to the county to,
And it's every day
Jail
that they're
them for-
not cleaning up their property.
yeah.
So.
hmm
Well, I think
Sin.
suspended time is
Any
probably the way to go.
none? Public comment?
Nothing to say right now, I think, but
I do. I had 4 complaints in that I took down. And one of them already had a judgment. I have the case file. The jury trial was on 12/7/18. That's a long time for nothing to have been done with a jury trial. And I know this summer, there was a little kid living there. I only hear say that there is still a child that lives at that place. They do take their garbage and put it outside. And still nothing's done. And with the sheriff's office, I know they're out doing drug enforcement and stuff. And in our particular neighborhood, which most of us are from, a lot of times, some of these places are also having the drug stuff being done. Not all of them, but some. So that person is out there searching for it anyhow, that they could maybe be part of the committee, because they're already out there. The ones that I took into Dan, I don't know if he's done anything with. And that was in July. I have a date. July 23rd, 2025. I also had done it January 3rd, 2023. Nothing is done. And because nothing's done to certain people, other people now are doing stuff. There's a house on 2nd Street. This is Burke and 2nd Street. And they're taking all of their stuff that they're stripping the inside of the house, dumping all of the garbage, the bricks, everything outside. We do have children in our neighborhood. Kids don't just stay in their yard or play. They're riding their bikes around. And I feel there needs to be, like you're setting up, a time frame that something's being done with where it's going, that department.
Appreciate
And
it.
it's not.
You can just talk with Mr. Martinson afterwards and ask him about the cases, and then
Especially the one that went to jury trial. And I know several of these people were in that jury trial and talked.
Well, so, with a case from 2018, there's a couple issues there, right? So, again, it's a misdemeanor case. The most they can do is put them on 2 years of probation. And the most that a court can do is impose any suspended jail or suspended fine as a sanction if there isn't anything that's abated, right? And so then that gets us to 2020. So to say that nothing has been done since 2018 is a bit of a misnomer, because nobody can do anything after they're off of probation. We don't have jurisdiction over them after they're off of probation. And so if anything was completed in that time frame and then the issue came back around, we can't go back to a 2018 conviction and say that that's where it started and that's where it should have continued, because we can't.
Okay, but if they didn't do it, and the county could set up a certain time frame that they go in and clean it up and immediately can put it on their taxes, and that has to come due. And if they don't, pay it, their property goes up for auction.
It won't go up for auction. You can't, it becomes a tax, but they'd have to be 3 years delinquent, and I mean, it's just,
Right.
it has to go
And
through
the
all
county
that.
then bears that cost for the amount of time, which the time that we did clean up that one property is $20,000.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we want to go and address 10 properties, that's $200,000 that the county taxpayers eventually pay until it maybe goes to an auction where it's paid off. So,
Well,
and that's at the very least, right? I mean, that one was $20,000 because they were able to get the road crew to come and help too, and use an outside contractor agency. But the cost of a civil abatement is astronomical, and that is a huge burden on the taxpayers because people don't pay it back. The city in that instance was lucky in that person had the money to pay them back, but the majority of people aren't going to do that. And so then the
Until
county
3 years?
is saddled with, a $20,000 deficit or more for one property for at least 3 years.
And the county won't put a lien on the property for services rendered?
Right, so then that only comes about if they sell it.
Mm-hmm.
Or 3 years, right?
No, they sell it.
Right,
They
so a
sell the-
lien
or-
would be after 3 years. I think that ours is assessed to the tax roll, which
Yeah.
again, you have to wait for 3 years and
Yep.
then it can go up to auction.
Yep.
And then if that auction pays off that lien or part thereof,
Right.
But I think they have to be in arrears anyway.
Yes,
taxes.
yes.
I mean,
tax-
they
property
can actually
taxes.
just limp that along for 20 years and actually not pay it until it goes up for auction. I mean, it's not, so it's kind of a hard deal on that end of it, where we're gonna get we're gonna be paid back or not.
Yeah.
Well, we'll eventually be paid back, but when? So, okay.
Well, I think part of the answer is Brittany alluded to, that when we go criminal, we have to follow the law. That costs money, that costs time, it costs all kinds of resources. So it's not that we don't want to do it. We're limited to what we can do with the resources we have, and we have to act within the law. What's logical, or what the old school way of just going out there and yelling at somebody, is not the way you do business anymore. So understanding that these things take time, take effort and resources that maybe we don't have, or certainly not as important as other things that the county needs to be responsible for, is what we're trying to get across here. It's not a lack of wanting to do the job. Everybody wants to do their job, but we want to do it legally and we want to do it efficiently.
And we want to do it in a way that doesn't cost the taxpayers, either by putting them in jail or getting a conviction that doesn't do anything, or paying thousands and thousands of dollars, or either to go back to what it was and to be saddled with that for a questionable amount of years.
All right. Well, we'll revisit this in 2 weeks.
I had one more thing.
You had 2 minutes. You had 2 minutes. Your 2 minutes were up. I'm sorry.
Okay, but you can say something. Okay.
All right. Thank you. Oh, you want to speak?
I do have something I want to ask about.
Okay.
There was a neighbor that is no longer living there that pushed a truck out into what I believe to be county property, because I live where 2 roads come together, and my property line ends, and the snowplow plows snow there during winter. This guy put a truck out there about 5 months ago, piled full of junk, and it just stayed there. Never got a ticket on it that I seen or anything else. He finally drove it off 2 nights ago. But now the other neighbor has put one out there also. I'm about ready to take my tractor and shove it in the middle of the road so that I don't have to look at it all the time. And why isn't anybody ticketing these things? They gave me a warning for doing 7 miles an hour over the speed limit up that road. And I told him I'm new here, but he wrote me a warning anyway, and I have a clean record. But this truck, and there'll probably be others, that they're looking for a free tow. what I'm thinking. How come they're not ticketed, or somebody look and see who owns this thing, and if not, tow it away?
And where's this at?
That's a-
Burke and Main Road.
The one that-
And actually, Dairy and
That
Main come together.
Okay.
I
During.
don't know any details,
Okay.
but,
All right.
well, it's certainly the answer,
Well, the other,
everything's complaint driven. And then,
Yeah.
once we get a complaint, we can take the necessary action
Okay.
and
The
send
other
the
thing
deputy
that-
out there.
actually, somebody here told me, this man left sewage in 2 coolers for somebody else to deal with. And I actually personally followed him the other night to where he was going to go, his new home. And I don't know if anybody even has his last name.
Okay.
But,
And we probably can't do it here. We shouldn't do it here. So, okay. Well, I can talk to you
Yeah,
afterwards
but
if that'd be
did he
fine.
just dump it on the ground? That's against law.
Mm-hmm.
I used to work in wastewater treatment.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
it's just sickening.
Yeah, I understand that. Where it's happening everywhere, even up our gulches where homeless people are camping and leaving their, it is getting to be a problem, and we're going to have to start dealing
That's
with it.
what we're,
So,
I'm trying to get this
okay.
fine tuned so that we can start
Well, I
moving
appreciate.
forward with it.
And we may need to increase the resources that we're putting into it if the problem's getting worse and worse. We've been trying to get by, but we don't budget for cleanup, and we don't budget for, we may have to figure out how to
Well, I appreciate everybody's comments and time, and thank you very much. We're adjourned.
All right.